What good does it do to raise your children in the finest home, give them the finest education, see to it they get the finest job, help them marry the finest person, help them launch the finest career, lead them to get the finest position in life, make sure they're buried in the finest casket, give them the finest funeral, lay them in the finest grave, only to stand before a God in eternity that they never knew and they never loved?
Hope and encouragement for life. Hope and encouragement for life. Touching lives.
Somewhere in the middle of the 20th century, a man and a woman would come together, they'd get married. Now that in and of itself was not unusual. In the beginning, they gave each other their undivided attention and their undiluted affection. In and of itself, not unusual. But then children came into the home. And that's where somehow along the line this massive shift occurred. And many times it occurred subconsciously. What happened was the wife somehow got the idea, my primary role is no longer to be a wife. My primary role is now to be a mother. And so either consciously or subconsciously, she began to totally immerse herself in the lives of her children. And so everything that she did was driven by what they wanted and what they needed and what they desired. Everything, her checkbook, her calendar, everything revolved around the kids. The husband, on the other hand, he came to the same conclusion that my primary role is no longer as a husband. My primary role is now that of a father. And so bearing that great responsibility, which it is a great responsibility. I was a father of 3 sons. It is an unbelievable responsibility. But then the husband said, well, I want my family to have more than I had, and I want my family to do more than I did. And so the husband began to make his number one desire, okay, how can I climb the corporate ladder? How can I get a better paycheck? How can I get a raise? And so how can I do for my kids what my parents couldn't do for me? And because remember, a lot of these parents came out of the Great Depression and they came out of World War II. And so somehow the mother buried herself literally in being the keeper of the household, and the husband buried himself in his work. And the mother basically said to the husband in no uncertain terms, you're not first in this relationship, they're first. And the husband said to her, you're right, you're not first, they're first. And all of that resulted in this dangerous mix of marriage being pushed down to the bottom of the barrel. And even with a godly family, a Christian family, a quote-unquote church-going family, the pyramid, at least in theory, looked like this: God, children, and marriage. And quite frankly, that's where the pyramid is for a lot of you right now. The truth of the matter is that in your home, children come first. They come first before the husband if you're the wife, and they come first before the wife if you're the husband. The center of gravity in the home becomes not the marriage relationship, which really was the beginning and was really meant to be the foundation of the home, but it becomes the children. And here's what happens, and it happens to so many people. That works for about 18 years. But then the children move out. And then all of a sudden you don't have a husband and a wife living together, you got 2 strangers. And they look at each other and go, who are you? And they come to find out, to their horror, that what held the marriage together is now gone because the kids are out. And the result is when the children move out, the foundation is destroyed, and what appeared to be the logical way of doing family and the right way of doing family actually had the pyramid all wrong, because God has a design for the family, and His design is an ultimate mythbuster. Because God's design for the family looks like this: God, marriage, and children. God said from the very beginning, the primary relationship in the home is not that of the mother to the children or the father to the children or the parents to the children. The primary relationship in the home is to the husband, and the wife is for the husband to be connected to the wife and the wife to be connected to the husband. But even that pyramid where you got God first, marriage second, children third, even that can be very misleading, because the truth of the matter is, in a lot of those pyramids, God's not even first. In a lot of pyramids, it looks more like children, marriage, God. And then some don't even have a pyramid. They have a box. And it's just children, marriage, and no God. And then in some, it's not even a box, it's a brick. And it's just children. There's no marriage and no God. Well, God has a plan. And God's plan is that, and the reason why God and family are so important is God has so defined the family and God has so designed the family. He is the only glue that can hold a family together, and He is the only guide that can take a family to heaven. And God has a plan for the family. And what we're going to do in the next several weeks in this series that we're calling Family Reunion is we're just going to unfold His plan of what His plan is for the family. And it's real simple. It's not rocket science. We believe that the Bible teaches that a true family reunion occurs when one thing happens. When a family makes up their mind, we're going to love God most, we're going to love God best, and we're going to love God first. That's God's plan for the family. When mom and dad and children come together and say, we're going to love God first, we're going to love God most, we're going to love God more than we love anything or anyone else. Now, let me tell you what happens when that really becomes a reality in your home. Our love for God will motivate the husband and the wife to love each other as Christ loved the church. The more I love God, the more I love Teresa. The more she loves God, the more she loves me. And that Christ-like love will serve as a model of love for the children who follow. That's the way it's to work. That's the way God's family plan is. I won't, and my three sons will tell you, they know one thing. They know that their dad loves their mother. And they know that their dad loves their mother supremely. And they know that their mother loves their dad, and they know that their mother loves their dad supremely. Now, where did I get this idea? Did I just make it up? Did I come up with it? Or did Dr. Dobson hand it down from Mount Sinai? I mean, where did this come from? Well, if you brought a copy of God's Word, I want you to turn to the 5th book in the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I want you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. I want you to keep in mind, I'm going to make a simple statement. You've heard it many times before, but we sometimes forget it. And that's why we're trying to redefine the family today, and that's why redefining the family won't work, because the family was not a human idea. God invented the family. The family was God's idea. It was not a human idea. It was not a government idea. It was not a school idea. It was God's idea. And the very first relationship that God created was not the relationship between a father and a son or a mother and a daughter or parents and children. The very first relationship that God created, humanly speaking, was a husband to a wife. And the second relationship that God created was the parent to the child. And that order is very, very important and not to be confused. So as we look here in Deuteronomy chapter 6, let me just kind of give you the backdrop and the background of this story. It's a signal moment in the history of the nation of Israel. I'm going to pretend that you don't even know the story, so let me just kind of catch you up. God has rescued Israel from being in bondage and slavery to the nation of Egypt for over 400 years. Well, He was going to take them to what we call the promised land, the land of Israel, but they disobeyed God, and so they've been wandering in the wilderness because they disobeyed God for 40 years. But now they're on the verge of finally invading and conquering and living in the land that God had promised them. And all the people are gathered before Moses. I mean, there are millions of people, most of them families, most of them homes, most of them moms and dads and children. And they're on the edge of enemy territory, and Moses is now giving them kind of final instructions on how they're going to invade the land and how they're going to conquer the land. And once that is accomplished, they're to settle down and live in the land. And he says, now this is what really concerns God the most. God's not concerned about your invading the land because He's going to lead the charge. And God's not concerned that you're going to conquer the land. He's already given you the victory. That's not what really concerns God. What concerns God is once you get it, can you keep it? Once you get it, can you live in such a way that you really are socially secure? And what Moses was saying was, God's not concerned about how you're going to take the land. What's concerning God is, once you do take the land, what are you going to do and how are you going to live once you get in the land? And Moses does something, to me, absolutely astounding. Every time I read this chapter, it blows my mind. Because let me tell you what the average leader would have done. Let me tell you what most politicians would have done. If most politicians had been standing that day before these millions of Israelites and they knew they were about to cross over and they were about to absolutely form a brand new nation, they would have been talking about things like this. They would have been saying, well, we need an executive branch, we need a legislative branch, we need a judicial branch. We need a stable financial system. We need a monetary system. We need a banking system. We need a standing army. We got to promote the general welfare. We got to provide for the general defense. Moses doesn't talk about any of that stuff. He doesn't talk about what kind of a government you're going to have, how you're going to select your leaders, are you going to have term limits, how you're going to balance your budget. He doesn't talk about any of that whatsoever. He begins with a simple affirmation that just absolutely boggles me. It just blows me away. He starts off and he basically says to all these millions of people standing before him, the survivability of your nation would depend upon the vitality of your homes. The survivability of your nation will depend upon the vitality of your family. And he begins by talking directly and primarily to the parents. And he gives instructions on what we ought to do as parents to have a family reunion that will last. So this is one of those, I'm really going to ask you to fill in some blanks this morning because this is so important to me. I had a guy come up to me after 9:30 and he said, man, you said sometimes you preach from here and sometimes you preach from here. Today you preach. I said, man, I always want to preach from here. I want to preach from here. And he said, you just preach with such passion today, and I hope I do that every message, but I do have a lot of pent-up passion about this because I see what's happening to the family. And I know enough history to know no country in the history of the world has ever survived the destruction of the family unit. No country. We won't be the exception. So how do you really have a family reunion that will last? All right, parents, here's what Moses said to the parents that day. Write this down. Number one, you're a parent, okay? Then that means I am to be a model as I follow God. For my kids, I'm to be a model as I follow God. Now let's pick up Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you're crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them, now watch this, may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life. Now, Moses says God's blueprint for a nation that will last begins with a home. He says you've got to have happy homes, you've got to have healthy homes, because a nation will never rise above its homes and the homes will never rise above the parents. So he begins by saying to moms and dads, he said, every mom and dad, I want you to listen to me. You are to be a model. You are to model the fear of God in your life. I want us to say those words together, 4 words. I am a model. If you're a mom and dad, let's say that together. I am a model. All right, say it again. I am a model. Whether you're a single parent or you got both husband and wife, you're a model. You don't have a choice. The issue is not, are you going to be a model? That's not the issue. The issue is, are you going to be a good one or a bad one? Because from the very beginning of life for our children, we are role models for them. We're the example setters. See, there's one thing I've learned about being a parent. Character is not taught to your children, it's taught by your children. You can teach your kids a lot of things. You can't teach them character. You can model character for them. You can't teach it to them. You can show them how to have good character and how to be a good character. You really can't teach it. They'll really watch how you act. See, the old saying is true. How you live screams so loudly, your kids won't hear what you say. That's one thing I learned. We all probably learned as parents the hard way. I did. You can talk to your blue in the face, but kids don't listen to what you say. They watch what you do. And if you're a parent, I want to tell you this morning, there is no substitute for a parent who will show their children by the way they live, by the language that they use, by the places that they go, by the TV programs that they watch, by the books that they read, by the people they associate with, that they really fear God. There's just no substitute for that. For having a parent who, even though a child may not totally understand what the fear of God even is, they'll look at their parents and say, I think I'm beginning to get the picture. Now, why is that so vital? Keep reading, verse 3. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. In other words, here's what Moses said. He said, I'm going to make this real simple. If it's good for the family, it will be good for the nation. If it's bad for the family, it'll be bad for the nation. If I were a legislator, if I were ever elected, I'm never going to run for anything, so, at ease. But if I were to ever run for office, if I was ever going to run for Congress or Senate, or if I was ever to be elected to any kind of legislative office, let me tell you one thing. There's one principle that would always guide me. I would never vote for legislation ever that I thought would hurt the family. Because if it hurts the family, it's going to hurt the country. If it's good for the family, it'll be good for the country. And Moses said, you want your country to survive? You want your country to be prosperous? You want the hand of God to be on your country? Yes, we do. He said, okay, then you better make sure you are a family that fears God. You better make sure as a parent, you model the fear of God in your life. Because if the parents set the pace, then the parents will set the example. So in case you're wondering, by the way, why parents ought to fear God and why parents ought to love God and why parents ought to put God first in everything they do, it's not just for your sake. It's not even just for the sake of your kids. It's for the sake of your grandkids. Moses said one chapter earlier in chapter 5, verse 29, oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always, so that it may go well with them and their children. We're supposed to be models for the next generation. Parents are to be models. Educators are to be models. Pastors are to be models. Church, we're to be models. Here's the second thing. He says, I'm to be a mirror as I love God. I'm to be a model as I follow God. I'm to be a mirror as I love God. Now, let me tell you how I know that Moses did not use a teleprompter. He does something that any public speaker will tell you. If you've ever taken public speaking, and I've taken a couple of courses, you don't ever do. Never interrupt yourself. He interrupts himself. I mean, right in the middle of this great speech, he interrupts himself. He says, oh, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Now, if you're sitting here as a parent and you're saying, well, Pastor, I need some help. What am I supposed to teach my kids? Let me tell you what I love about God's Word. God's Word simplifies so many things that we try to complicate. Moses basically tells parents then, like he tells parents now, there are really only two things you ought to teach your kids. Now, it'll take you the entire time they're in your home to teach it. And after they leave, they'll spend a lifetime learning it. But Moses said, you don't have to teach your kids 10 or 20 or 30 things. Just teach your kids two things. Now, the problem is most parents stop at the first one and really don't go on to the second one. So what do you teach your kids? Right here, it's right here in verse 3. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. First thing you teach your kids, there is a God and that God is real. When a family really loves God, the mother and father will show it by serving each other. The husband will serve the wife and the wife will serve the husband. As those children watch that husband love that wife and watch that wife love that husband and watch that husband serve that wife and watch that wife serve that husband, they begin to catch this godly value. Oh, that's what loving God looks like. Loving God flows into serving others, and as they watch that, a story begins to develop. And hopefully and prayerfully what will happen is then the children get married, and guess what they do? They teach their family to love God. And if you have a son, he serves his wife the way he saw dad serve his wife. And if you have a daughter, she serves her husband the way she saw her mother serve her husband. And that love for God and that service for each other gives a story that the children will also share. Now, at this point, this is the hardest part of this sermon. I just want to tell you right now, this is just, please hang with me right here. This is the broccoli. This is the asparagus. If I hadn't hit your bad spot yet, these are the turnip greens. It's the elephant in the room, but it deserves an answer. Why is it that there seems to be so many church-going parents who turn out children who eventually forsake the church and turn their backs on Christianity? And it's happening with alarming frequency. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Now, I'm going to give you one major reason. I'm not saying it's the only reason, and I'm not saying you can look at any one parent and say this is the reason, but I am convinced if you were to say to me, Pastor, why do you think you've got so many parents who, they regularly went to church, they regularly attended church, they were members of a church, they took their kids to church, but as soon as those kids got that high school diploma, as soon as they hit that college, boom, they're gone and they don't come back, and many of them don't ever return. And we're talking about being a mirror. So let me just kind of make it real plain. If your kids cannot see in your life, mom and dad, a burning, blazing, passionate love for God, they're looking at a cracked mirror. And you may think your religious motion going is fooling them, but it really isn't. I heard about a Bible teacher one time talking to a group of kids, and he asked this question. He said, why do you love God? He was just going down the line. Why do you love God? He said the best answer he got was from a kid sitting all the way on the end of the row. He said, Mr. Smith, he said, I'll be honest with you, I don't know why I love God. I guess it just runs in my family. Boy, that's what I want. I want my love for Jesus Christ to run through James and Natalie. And I want that same river to flow into the heart of my grandson, Harper. And I want that same love to flow in the heart of his son or daughter, who I may or may not live to see. And then I want that love to flow through my great-great-grandson or granddaughter, who I'm pretty sure I'll never live to see. I want it to run in our family. I am a mirror. And Mom and Dad, I don't care what else you give your kids. I really don't care if you don't give your kids a real love for God. You think about it. What good does it do? You tell me. What good does it do to raise your children in the finest home, give them the finest education, see to it they get the finest job, help them marry the finest person, help them launch the finest career, lead them to get the finest position in life, make sure they're buried in the finest casket, give them the finest funeral, lay them in the finest grave, only to stand before a God in eternity that they never knew and they never loved? I'm a mirror. I'm to be a mirror that loves God. I'm to be a model that follows God. And here's the last thing, real brief. I'm to be a mentor as I teach about God. I am to be a mentor. Now, he gives specific instructions on what we're to do, what he just told him. He just told him what they ought to do. Now he says, okay, here's how you do it. Now listen to what he says in verse 6. We'll be finished. These commandments that I give you. Well, what commandments did he give them? He only gave them really one. Teach, or 1A and 1B. Teach your kids that there is a God and that God is real, and teach those kids to love that God with all their heart, soul, mind, strength. That's all I want you to teach them. I said, now, what do you do? How do you do that? Verse 6. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your heads and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. And notice what he said was, you plaster God everywhere. Everywhere you put these commandments, everywhere you can, every time you get a chance, you teach your kids about the reality of God, and you teach your kids how to have a relationship with God. And I know you've heard this before, but there's something that Moses makes very plain here, and I want you to hear me. The primary responsibility for educating your children does not lie with the schools, it lies with you. God meant for moms and dads to be the primary professors in the lives of their children. I am a mentor. Let's say that together. I am a mentor. So where do your kids learn right from wrong? They learn it in the home. Where should they be taught that actions have consequences? In the home. Where do they learn personal responsibilities? Where do they learn to be kind, courteous, submit to authority, be obedient, practice selflessness? Where do they learn to love God? Where do they learn to serve others? They learn it in the home. And when a family loves God and a family serves each other, they have a story to share. And so parents, the greatest gift you'll ever give your kids is not a will, it's not a living trust, it's not a truckload full of money. The greatest gift you will ever give your children is a godly mother and a godly father that shows them by the way you live, the way you act, the way you talk, and where you go and what you do. I don't love anybody, including you, as much as I love God. And I don't want you to love anybody as much as you love God. And I tell my family all the time, and I've been good at this. I'm not good at a lot of things, but my Teresa's sitting here on the front row. She'll say amen. I'm great at telling my family I love them. There's not a day that goes by that I don't tell my wife many times, and there's not a day that goes by I don't tell all three of my kids every day that I love them. Not a day. But I'll tell you what I told them from the time they came out of their womb. I love you and I love your mother, but I don't love anybody like I love Jesus. And I don't want you to love anybody like you love Jesus. I want us to love Jesus because the more we love Jesus, the more we'll love each other. And I don't know about your family. You may be sitting there and maybe you're the Brady bunch. Maybe your family has it all together. Maybe you're sitting there saying, man, we can skip out. We just go to the lake the next 3 weeks. Well, that just tells me you do need to be here. But if you want to have a family reunion that will last forever, don't miss the next 3 weeks. Because I'm going to talk to parents in ways that I've never talked to parents before. And I'm going to talk to kids, and we're going to talk to husbands and wives. And we're going to kind of go back to family one-on-one, and we're going to say, okay, this is how God wants you to do it. So I close with this. I always bring everything back to Jesus because Jesus is the subject of the entire Bible. Jesus is the hero of the Bible. I think Jesus ought to be the hero of every sermon. The reason why Jesus Christ died on the cross, the reason why Jesus Christ was buried, the reason why Jesus Christ was raised from the dead, primary purpose, John 1:12, as many as received Jesus, to them he gave the power to become children of God. God gave Jesus so that one day, when this earth is over, there will be a family reunion that will last for eternity. But until that day comes, God wants us to have family reunions that will last here and now.
Has God lost his rightful place in your family? Are you struggling to lead your children into a life that honors Christ? Don't face these challenges alone. At Touching Lives, we care about families and we want to help. Call us today at 1-800-413-1131 and someone will pray with you. Recently, the media has been labeling young people as, quote, entitled, and it's not hard to see how they come to this conclusion. What went wrong? Well, for some of us, we've shifted our priorities and given our children the wrong place and given God last place in our families. But there's a solution. Learn how to reorder your family structure to God's original design with the series Family Reunion. Order your copy of the series today. CDs $25, DVDs $45 at touchinglives.org or call toll-free 1-800-413-1131. Now, a look at the next Touching Lives.
Why do you think it's so easy for us to talk to our kids about everything except God? I mean, we don't seem to find it hard to talk to our kids about the prom, about the upcoming football game, about what's going on at school, or about daily, current events. What are they going to be doing that weekend? About the latest movie. Well, if you can talk about things, you can talk about God. And let me be honest. Let me help you here. I don't really think this naturally happens. I really don't. You've got to work at keeping your mind alert on ways you can talk about God.
Home is where children learn personal responsibilities, to be kind and to submit to authority. Home is where they learn how to love God. At Touching Lives, we're passionate about helping build strong, godly families. And thanks to the faithful prayers and financial support of our donors, we're able to equip families all around the world. Thank you.